Here's Johnny. Welcome to another episode of Top of the List, everybody. Of course, we will be reviewing The Shining, classic horror film. Definitely one of my, if not, definitely one of my favorite films of all time, but 100% my favorite horror film of all time. This is my number one, top of the list for me. Of course, I'm Dom, here with my co-host, RB, coming off of a rather significant day the other day. Ryan, you want to quickly talk about that before we get into the review?
Yes, sir. My world champion Los Angeles Dodgers defeating the Tampa Bay Rays in 6 games in the World Series. So couldn't be more proud to be a Los Angeles Dodgers fan. Of course, the first one of my lifetime of the Dodgers' last World Series, 1988. So of course I'll be swagged out in the Dodgers gear for the next foreseeable few episodes as we'll be filming them. Riding this high of the Dodgers World Series championship, the first one in 32 years, as you just alluded to, Dom.
You bear a striking resemblance to Dustin May in that Dodgers outfit there, Ryan.
It must be the long flowing red locks, all right?
All right. So without further ado, let's go right into this one. So I'm really, really excited to hear what you have to say about this one, Ryan. So if you haven't seen any of our other Halloween episodes, we've dropped a few. Hubie Halloween. What was the other one, Ryan?
Did we drop the Lighthouse yet?
Haven't dropped the Lighthouse yet, but we did talk about family Halloween movies.
That's right. Yep.
And so we're talking Halloween movies this year, this month. Not a big horror fan yourself, Ryan, but let me just make it nice and simple for me. Yep. The Shining, 10 out of 10. Like I said, my favorite horror movie of all time. It's my favorite Stanley Kubrick movie. It's my favorite Jack Nicholson movie. I am absolutely obsessed with this film. The first time I watched it was with my mom, and then I rewatched it for, I think, the third or fourth time today before we recorded this with my dad. I finally, after like the past 5-6 years, finally got him to watch it with me. He will not watch any horror movies, but he's a huge Jack Nicholson fan, was able to convince him, and he really loved this one. But yeah, so I want to get right into what you got to say, Ryan. Leading off with, I think, what is probably, we talk about horror is subjective, and as a whole, film is very subjective. But I think the most objective positive in this film is the cinematography, the shot selection, the direction. So go right ahead, Ryan. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so I'm just gonna jump in, just talking about a little bit about this film. Of course, as we've mentioned countless times on this show, I'm not a horror fan. Been told by many people, that this is probably the masterpiece horror film.
Yeah.
But like I said, I'm not a horror film guy, and I was 0 for 2 in Stanley Kubrick films. Honestly, I've seen Space Odyssey and Doctor Strangelove. Really didn't like either of them. So if it weren't for your goading on, I wouldn't have really watched this.
Okay.
But that being said, I'm grateful that you did. Really enjoyed this film. Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with the cinematography. I don't think there's anything super scary about this film if it weren't for the brilliant cinematographic choices by Stanley Kubrick. Some of those cuts, they're just so sudden and shocking that they catch you by surprise. It's something that by today's standards, what we see in horror films today wouldn't be quote unquote scary, but just it's not subtle. It's, it's like you're going right, and then a sharp left on some of these shots, and it's just like, wow, that really caught me by surprise. On top of that, you've got an all-star cast, incredible performances up and down. Of course, Jack Nicholson steals the show, but, I think there's some other awesome performances. Shelley Duvall, Danny Lloyd, of course, I think was incredible as Danny, their son, and Tony is the little man in his mouth, or little boy.
I gotta say there, Danny Lloyd in this movie, I think he gives. Maybe you can elaborate. Maybe you disagree. I think this is the greatest child performance ever put on film.
Yeah, I mean, there are some great child performances. Don't get me wrong. Big Jerry Maguire fan. I think Jonathan Lipnicki in that is fantastic. I think it was both Dylan and Cole Sprouse in Big Daddy, an Adam Sandler film. I think that's a great performance. But I do agree. Having a child perform in such an adult, I say adult film and it comes out as like it's pornography. It's not. No. But, an adult aligned film, a film that children his age are not watching. Yeah. And to have him act that perfectly was incredible. I mean, the whole thing with Tony was, from the beginning, just so uncanny and, just, sends chills down your spine, just creepy. And the way, I mean, at the end where he's sort of possessed by Tony and Tony's not here, Danny's not here, Mrs. Torrance. It's unbelievable, man.
Yeah, it really is, man. And I think that there's a lot of certain things in this film that cause him to want to, like, there's a lot of, like, I guess you could say where he has to, like, speak in the voice, like you said, of Tony. But then there's like a lot of trance-like stares that you have to pull off. And as a child actor, that's just facial expressions. There's no lines there. I was trying to gather my words there for a sec, but I think that's kind of what I'm talking about. And the scene that comes to mind, I don't know if we're going to get into specifics now, but the scene that comes to mind is when his mom is trying to get, his attention and stuff, and they're watching, I think it's the Roadrunner cartoons in front of the television. And, he stays in character. At that point, he's hypnotized and he's taken over by Tony. And at that point, his mom is saying, I'm going to go talk to your dad. Okay, Danny? And then no answer. Okay, Danny? And then goes, yes, Mrs. Torrance. Mm-hmm. He stays in character like that. It's really, really creepy. And it adds a lot of unsettling vibes to the film.
Absolutely. And I think, doubling back to the facial features too. I mean, that opening first sequence that we have where he's, sort of entranced just in the bathroom at his home. And we see, the first time the elevator doors opening, the two girls, and then we see that look of terror on his face, the close-up intercut with the girls alive and then murdered on the hotel floor. I think, it's truly incredible, including, some of his performance just as Danny too. I think the relationship, and it's small, but I really like it. The scene between him and Dick Hallorann, the chef,
Scatman Crothers.
Yeah, where they're talking about The Shine and The Shining, I thought was an awesome sequence, and having hit that chemistry between the two of them on screen was incredible.
Absolutely, and big shout out to Scatman Crothers. Yeah. Rest in peace, sir. I think this is one of the best parts of the movie. Scatman Crothers adds a lot of, we talk about exposition where you have to kind of give a background or talk about what's happened in the past. And sometimes that delivery fails. Sometimes that's the weakest part of the film. But having Scatman Crothers deliver the background on what is The Shining, why is the Overlook Hotel so creepy and ominous, it really gets you into the movie, and it's so unsettling. So, but before we go any further into specifics of the story, we got to talk about the historical impact of this one, Ryan. The film came out in 1980, right? Yep. And I'm not sure if you knew this, Ryan, but this movie was panned by the critics and audiences alike. People thought this was one of the worst movies of the year. Shelley Duvall actually won the Razzie for Worst Actress of the Year for this film, which I think is blasphemous because she's fantastic in this movie.
Yeah, I agree.
So, I mean, did you know any about that, or what did you think about that?
I had no idea. And I mean, I couldn't imagine that. I think this is a masterpiece. Cinematographically speaking, yes. I have some problems with the story, and I don't know how much of that is Kubrick and how much of that is Stephen King, and maybe he went more in depth in the book than it was talked about in the film. So I mean, I'm going to give this film, I don't think I've given my score yet.
Yeah, go for it.
8.5 out of 10. But to hear that, it was destroyed by critics is shocking to me.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you brought up Stanley Kubrick, Stephen King. The Shining is Stephen King book, Stanley Kubrick taking over this film. Very, very famously, Stephen King has said he hates The Shining. He thinks that Stanley Kubrick butchered this movie, and the book is very different. One difference is that 237 is the room in the film. that is very famous. In the book, it's a different number. I'm not quite sure what the number is, but they had to change it to 237 in the film because they predicted that the film would be so famous that people would want to stay in room 237 all the time. So they had to make 237 up so that it wouldn't be a room that's actually in the hotel that they use for the locations. But another big historical impact here, Ryan, has to do with well, I actually have two more things. Number one, a lot of people did not like Jack Nicholson in this movie. Some people thought that he was terrible. Some people thought that he was way over the top. And, I watched it with my dad just now. He said, yeah, it's good, but he's a little over the top. There's better performances. My dad says he likes him in A Few Good Men better. He likes him in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest better. For me, this is the best Jack Nicholson performance I've ever seen. But before I hand it over to you on Jack Nicholson's performance, just one other thing I want you to think about too. There's a lot of theorizing that has to go with this movie. A lot of fan, I guess the only way I could think of it is as saying like a fan theory, right? And if you look at this movie from the perspective of how crazy people can get about interpreting a director's film, it is so interesting because, there's the famous shot of Danny wearing the Apollo 11 sweatshirt, which very famously people have made this weird theory, even though I think it's completely false. People have always even though now today it's definitely not true, but people back in the day used to say Stanley Kubrick faked the moon landing. Have you ever heard that before, Ryan?
I had not, no.
A lot of people after 2001 A Space Odyssey came out said, well, the special effects in that movie were so groundbreaking that people actually believe that he faked the moon landing and that we never were able to send U.S. astronauts onto the moon. And it was a big cover-up so that people in the U.S. we win the space race. That actually was, people thought it was actually the Soviets that were there first, and Kubrick covered it up. So America, they thought that, JFK got Kubrick to, cover it up for him. And in this film, he's wearing the Apollo 11 sweatshirt, and people are thinking that's an apology for the cover up of the moon landing. So that's just another interesting tidbit. But so what do you think about that and Jack Nicholson's performance in this one?
I think, to your first point, I think people read way too far into things. And if anything, if that, I would say that's got to be, with Space Odyssey coming out before this. Space Odyssey was in the early 70s, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
Yeah, I think it's 71 or something like that.
Yeah. I think that, first of all, if anything, that was sort of Kubrick as a poking fun at that theory more than anything else. I think so too,
yeah.
But and then following up to the second question about Jack Nicholson, I thought Jack Nicholson was perfect in this film. I thought he personified madness, which, however you want to look at this film. And I think, like I said, this is one of my flaws with this film is this a film about someone going mad, or is there actually some supernatural elements? Of course, there are supernatural elements you see at the end of this film. But I would like to argue that the film is about madness and about Jack Nicholson going mad. So I don't think he's over the top at all. I think, I think he was brilliant in this. Honestly, I really liked how it was played, especially hearing his background. About he's an alcoholic and how he lost his temper one night at Danny and pulled his shoulder out. I bought it completely.
Yeah, totally. And that kind of leads me into just on the topic of Jack Nicholson in this movie. Thinking back, just kind of going through the timeline of this movie, the opening shots of this film of him driving up in his bug, the yellow bug, up the mountain into the overlook, some incredible helicopter shots, incredible long takes. Cinematography immediately brings you in. And then we get what could be something very mundane in a horror movie, a job interview. And that's what is so masterful about this performance for me. And I want to know if you agree with me on this, is that Jack Nicholson is so reserved at the beginning of this film. He's just trying to get this job. He seems like your average Joe. He was a teacher. Now he wants to write. He seems like a perfectly sane guy, and until you learn more about his history. But, in this job interview, it's very mundane. And he's cracking jokes even, It almost feels like at some points he's in a comedy in this film, even though it's a thriller, it's a psychological horror. But, and that's what's so masterful about this, is that he can elevate from the very mundane thing of a job interview, all the way up until where he's slashing at his wife with an axe. You know, I think that's what's so incredible about this.
Yeah, and that's Jack Nicholson. Jack Nicholson, I believe, has always thrown that incredible range. Whether it's Cuckoo's Nest, I haven't seen A Few Good Men, but I've seen scenes from it, or even something as the first thing I saw Jack Nicholson in was a movie later in his life in The Bucket List with Morgan Freeman. And even in that film, he shows great emotional range from his dealing with his own mortality all the way to his, comedic, eccentric millionaire, in brief moments. And it's believable. It doesn't seem forced at all. I think Jack Nicholson himself is a guy I'd love to have a meal with and be able to just have a discussion, because it's incredible the range he shows and the ability to change that range in films, in a single scene, not even in cut sequences, because I understand you can go back in the editing room, but these are in single scenes we see changes in him.
Couple more things on Jack Nicholson before we I kind of want to move towards like the deeper meanings of this movie towards the end of this, but I do want to stick with Jack Nicholson for a little bit longer. First of all, I just want to give another fact. Like I said, this is one of my favorite movies of all time, so I have so many fun facts I want to just put out there for our listeners. But one thing is that Jack Nicholson really, really, really wanted to be in this movie, like really bad. He wanted this part so bad, in fact, that he was so committed to being miserable and showing that he was going into madness that he would only let craft service make cheese sandwiches for him, which is famously his least favorite food out of everything. So he would only eat cheese sandwiches for breakfast, lunch, and dinner on set. So he would physically be miserable. And you could tell on screen, he is sweating. Yeah. He is, really feeling it. And that really shows. And just my final kind of little fact too, is that has to do with another performance in this movie, Shelley Duvall. She, as Wendy in this movie, has to be devastated throughout the movie. She is absolutely that way for most of this film. And it's very subtle sometimes, and then sometimes it's very clear. And very famously, it's unknown whether or not this was just Stanley Kubrick being an ass or whether it was to actually get this performance out of her. But Stanley Kubrick really mistreated Shelley Duvall on the set of this film, treating her verbally abusive. No one's really sure if there's physical abuse or anything like that, but very famously, she said that this was one of the worst times she's had ever making a film. So that's kind of my fun facts there for that. Any comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, I believe that, if Kubrick was doing this intentionally, it was to put her in the role of, what did she go by? Wendy, correct?
Wendy Torrance, yeah.
Yeah. Just because, I mean, that's how she is. Essentially, she seems to be the faithful wife of alcohol. Yes, he's trying to recover. I get that, but an alcoholic, abusive man, and she's there for him. She seems to stand by. I mean, the scene where she goes in to the room to check on him, and he reads her a riot act. Leave me the fuck alone when I'm in this room. How about that? I mean, I think that's one way to get your actors to truly capture that persona.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And then just to kind of close off the Jack Nicholson section of this review, I just want to know what's your favorite line? There's so many great Jack Nicholson lines in this movie. I mean, of course, there's the most famous one, "Here's Johnny," that I said at the beginning. For me, my favorite Jack Nicholson line has got to be, it's so tough. I love everything with Lloyd the bartender. Maybe that's one of your favorites, but
there are some great ones there.
Yeah, and I think for me, it's got to be when he's finally insane and he goes around and he's chasing her up the staircase and she's swinging the bat at him. "Say away from me," and he's like, "You didn't let let's finish my sentence. I didn't say I said I wasn't gonna hurt you. I just want to bash your brains in, bash her right the fuck in." It's so crazy.
Yeah, I think you took the words out of my mouth. I think that has to be one of my favorite lines too. I think one of the more powerful scenes as well is when he's in the the very end of the film as well, where he's screaming after, I think first he's screaming after Danny, but then he's screaming "wait" when they're getting into the snowcat. And just, as he, continuing to spiral into madness, it just becomes indistinct, just almost howling. He's turned almost to a beast from man. just screaming in the hedge maze before he sort of just sits down and succumbs to the elements. I think just a powerful sequence. It's hard for any actor to pull off.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, like, I think we got to talk about the Lloyd scenes with Lloyd the bartender, and plus, I can't remember. I'm gonna murder myself for this, but I think it is. I can't remember. I don't have the name on the back, but the caretaker before him that chopped up the two girls with the axe and killed his wife. He meets him in the bathroom, calls him Jeevesy, old boy. You know, that's another great scene with Jack Nicholson.
Yeah, the bathroom scene, absolutely.
But you know, Lloyd the bartender. Delbert Grady. Delbert Gravy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, man, that is such a good scene. And plus everything with Lloyd, good man, Lloyd. And, you know, there's all such good things. And, you know, the Lloyd the bartender with another great line. Women can't live without him.
Without him, yep.
Wise words, Lloyd, wise words. I love that part. And yeah, you know, there's so many great lines we can talk about all day.
The sequences, I think that's the big turning point in this film is, you know, when Jack Nicholson either begins to turn and start going mad or, you know, truly becomes, you know, possessed and encapsulated in this evil hotel is when he says, I would give my soul for a glass of beer right now. And then he looks up and that's when he sees Lloyd. And, you know, I think that's what this film, after, you know, sitting and reading enough about this film, I think that's what it's about is, you know, being able to not succumb to your weaknesses, not succumb to your vices. And if you do, you become part of this evil hotel. And, you know, clearly Jack Nicholson is a weak man who succumbs to his vices.
Absolutely. And I think that leads us right into the confession where he says, you know, 1 foot-pound per second, little too much force. And, you know, he talks about he actually did, you know, dislocate his son's shoulder. And he says, you know, I never heard a hair on his goddamn head. I love the son of a bitch. You know, I just love doing my Jack Nicholson impression at this point. But, you know, I think there's a lot to say there. And that kind of leads me into, let me just finish off my thoughts before I lead you into our kind of discussion of what the implications of the ending are. What makes this movie one of the best of all time for me has to be the fact that, you know, a lot of directors will use flashbacks to show things. Kubrick does not do that in this film for the most part. He uses foreshadowing, not flashbacks, foreshadowing, and he uses long takes of dialogue with people staring into the camera to explain what's happened in the past. For instance, a lot of filmmakers, when, you know, the doctor comes to visit Danny before they go to the hotel, and when he's explaining what happened in the past, a lot of filmmakers would cut to a flashback of him actually breaking the child's arm or something like that. No, it is just the dialogue that speaks for itself. And also when they discuss what happened to the previous caretaker's family, how he chopped them up with an axe, some filmmakers might cut to a shot of him chopping up his children or killing his wife or something. No, he lets the dialogue breathe for itself, and he lets you make that image in your own mind, which is to me why some people say this film isn't terrifying at all. To me, this film terrifies me. So do you have any comments as far as that part of the filmmaking, Ryan?
No, I agree, definitely. I mean, almost to a point that it's realistic because you don't have that flashback. So you are in those flashbacks. You're in the moment. Even when you have these supernatural elements that are happening in the film, you just assume that you are watching this film through the lens, through the eyes of Jack Torrance, a man who's going mad, who is seeing these things. These things, I mean, I think, at least the way I watched this film, and like I said, you know, at the ending, which is kind of one of my negatives, where it truly becomes something supernatural and isn't just purely him going mad from loneliness and overworking and whatever you want to call it. You know, I'm watching this film through a lens of this is what it is like to truly go mad. And I think that's what was so terrifying for me, is we are slowly descending into madness as Jack Torrance is going through this transition.
Absolutely. And, you know, I gotta, you know, defend my favorite film here for you, Ryan. I had a feeling you would feel this way about the ending. And the fact that, I know you have a hard time with that suspension of disbelief, right? I'm not unfounded in saying that at all. And I think that this film shows its hand very early on that there is a lot of stuff going on supernatural. Yes, like you said, this film, the theme, the meaning, the subtext of this film is a man going into madness, but it is never the reality of the film. The reality of the film is explained early on when Danny is talking to his imaginary friend and he takes over his body sometimes, which, yes, you could argue that might be a mental illness, but then get to the Overlook Hotel and you start hearing other people's thoughts, specifically Scatman Crothers' thoughts in his own head. Therefore, there's some psychic things going on here early on in the movie. And then Scatman Crothers explains the hotel, the Overlook Hotel itself, has a shine to it. Therefore, from that moment on, it's like specifically supernatural. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to go back. This is why I gave this film an 8.5 out of 10 and not a higher score, a 9 or a 10.
Yeah.
I just felt like, yes, I think that was a great sequence where it's explained to Danny The Shine, but I wanted to know more about The Shining. For a film that's called The Shining, I feel like it's mentioned once or twice in the film, and that's it. And that kind of, irked me. Like I said, I was curious if Stephen King mentions it more so in the novel, if it's mentioned totally in other novels. Obviously now I'm thinking maybe I do have to, even though, I didn't really, this film did give me the heebie-jeebies, so to speak. I don't know that I necessarily want to go watch Dr. Sleep, but just for that closure, because, I mean, it seems like The Shining does seem, the Shining, the ability, quote unquote, not so much the film, but The Shining, the ability seems to be the center point of the film, or the centerpiece of the film, Dr. Sleep. So maybe I do have to watch it just for some closure, because at the moment, like I said, I can live with a film that's going to go a supernatural direction. I just wish there was a little bit more of the supernaturality, super nature, whatever, however you would explain that. I also, and I think we're going to get into this here as we finish up the episode, talking about the ending. I don't know that I necessarily understood the ending. That final portrait was, so I think we should talk about that.
Let's talk about that. And remind me to talk about Dr. Sleep before we end the episode, because I do have something to say about that, and I will forget. So make sure you remind me on that, buddy. Okay. But let's talk about the ending. Number one, this has to do with the ending. Another reason why I think this film is really amazing is, number one, they don't make this kind of movie anymore. Ryan, we've talked about in our previous horror reviews that personally, anyone can be scared by a loud noise and get a shot of adrenaline. People can have something slam in front of their face or a motorcycle race down the road, and that's a shot of adrenaline. This film has very few jump scares from what I can tell. I mean, I just rewatched it again. Sure, there's those shots where he turns around a corner and there's the two little girls there. If you're thinking of that as a jump scare, I don't know if that's quite a jump scare. I think that's him just turning a corner and showing you something and not letting you look away. What do you think?
I don't know that I would call that the jump scare. I think the jump scare is more the sequence, when he's possessed the first time by Tony, and he sees the girls dead all over, hacked up with the axe, cut back, girls alive, cut to his face. I think that's more the jump scare. Or when Wendy's running through the hotel at the end, and we have, she gets to the room and she sees that there are people in the room.
That part messes with my head every time I see it. That's so disturbing to me.
That was quite honestly the scariest part of the film to me.
That always, and
where she's running through those, and then she turns and there's the dead body of Scatman Crothers, who's been axed to death, and what's real and what isn't, because we know that's real. We saw Jack Nicholson kill him. Right. But then, all these other people that are all of a sudden in the hotel are the skeletons that are in the gold room. What's real? What isn't?
Yeah, and another reason why they don't make this kind of movie anymore, I think, is, and which is another thing to remind me on Dr. Sleep, is also a very long movie. This is a long movie. This movie takes its time. Yes. It doesn't go fast. The pacing is slow. And a lot of people won't like that in a horror movie. But for me, I think from second one, literally the first second of this movie, you can feel that something is building. And for me, what is building is a sense of dread. It's like a car accident. You see something very, very terrible happen, and you just can't look away. For me, that's how I feel about this movie. And, and that's what is really great about Kubrick movies in general, is that he'll show, like, I feel like I've said this to you before, but he will show you something that, and this is leading us right into our discussion of the ending, buddy. He will show you something fully in a shot. Maybe sometimes it's a zoom in close up. Maybe sometimes it's a long wide take, but he will show you something you don't understand at all. Something confounding, bewildering, I'm using all my English major vocabulary words right now, but he'll show you something like that. And what makes him such a master is he won't explain it to you. He wants you to explain it for yourself. And that's why this film is so important to me, which leads us to the ending of this film. If you haven't seen you don't know the ending of this film, obviously I'm going to put spoilers in the title, but go and watch this one. I give it a full recommend. Ryan, you give it a recommend as well?
Absolutely. Yeah. Must see.
So what is your takeaway from the ending? Obviously we get the long, slow zoom on a black and white picture frame from 1921 with Jack Nicholson, Jack Torrance in the foreframe. But what's your takeaway overall of the meaning of this movie?
Yeah, I thought I had it all figured out until the very end of this film. Once again, like I told you, I felt like this was a film, with the exception of Danny's character, and Danny and his relationship with Scatman Crothers, Dick Hallorann.
Mm-hmm.
I thought this was a film that was about madness and giving into your vices and going mad. But
that's only part of the message, though, really.
Exactly. So the more and more I think about it, I circled back, and I talked about this earlier, about the line before we have the bartender. I'm sorry, what's his name? The bartender? Lloyd the bartender, where he goes, "I would give my soul for a glass of beer right now." And what Lloyd shows up, and we know that Jack is sober, not anymore, and he gives into his vices. So from what I've been reading, online, and I think, there have been a lot of theories online that I read, but I think the one I agree with most is that this is a hotel that takes in evil. Yep. Jack clearly is a man who gave into his vices immediately when given the opportunity, and the hotel took him in from that point. That's when he starts seeing people, he ends up at the party in the ballroom, that 1921 4th of July ball. I think that also leads us to, the blood in the elevator. That's a sequence of everyone who's gone mad and been taken in by the hotel and then murdered someone in their life or has died themselves. So, that's what my takeaway was of this film. And then I don't know, then maybe The Shining, or at least Tony, and I'm sure Tony has something to do with The Shine, is trying to steer them away from the hotel, why they're so averse to going to the hotel, why he gives Danny that flashback. And then when Jack starts going mad and is about to kill him, that Tony completely possesses Danny's body. And, get the famous Red Rum, into Red a panic.
Red Rum.
Yeah, where finally, they go, he writes it on the door so that his mother sees it in the mirror, and they lock themselves in the bathroom, which is essentially, saves them from being hacked to death then and there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm really glad you got that meaning from this movie, and that's exactly what I think too. I think that the hotel, the Overlook Hotel itself, it takes over anyone who has committed a sin within it, right? It steals their soul and traps it there for all eternity as long as the hotel lives on. And, it's hinted to earlier on in the film that the hotel was built on ancient Indian burial grounds, right? And that kind of plays into it too. And then earlier on in the film, even to add into it, Jack Nicholson is kind of, doesn't really know whether or not it's the specific area of where the Donner Party went missing and all those succumb to cannibalism. So there's that hint to it. Maybe that has something to do with it as well.
I had totally forgotten about that sequence as they're driving to the hotel. That's a great point.
That makes it even more unsettling for me because, it plays into that thing, sin, vices, like you said. It really absorbs all the evil around it and traps it there, which is why Jack Nicholson shows up in the portrait at the end in 1921. And to me, the portrait itself is everyone in that picture are all the souls that are trapped there for all eternity. And throughout the whole hotel, you don't he never specifically locks in or zooms in or focuses on it, but throughout the entire hotel there are so many black and white pictures that you could just pick up on in the edge of frames. And to me, that just shows that there are trillions of souls trapped within this hotel, and that just makes it so creepy to me.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree definitely. And I think that brings us to now what your point is that you wanted to make on Dr. Sleep.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just wanted to bring this to your attention, Ryan, as well. I don't know if I ever mentioned it to you before, Ryan, but a guy named Mike Flanagan. He is my favorite director working right now. He's closely tied with Christopher Nolan, I think, and a few other guys, but he's probably my favorite director, especially in horror. He did The Haunting of Hill House. He did The Haunting of Bly Manor. He's done Oculus. He's done Gerald's Game, another Stephen King adaptation, and he did Dr. Sleep, which has a 75% on Rotten Tomatoes, nothing to scoff at all, but did not make very much money at all. People did not like the film. A lot of audiences walked away disappointed. I don't know if I'm ever going to do a video on Dr. Sleep, maybe if you watch it in the future, but just so you know where I'm standing on it. Ryan, as a sequel to The Shining, Dr. Sleep is a 9.5 for me. I don't think it's that perfect 10 out of 10 that The Shining is, but it's as damn close as it could be. It's like Godfather 1 and Godfather 2. They're as damn close to each other as you can possibly get. Dr. Sleep is another really long movie, and what Mike Flanagan did in this film is, yes, there's more modern scares. There's a couple of jump scares, which I think are well executed in the film. But what Mike Flanagan does in this movie, and I'm being very careful not to spoil anything, is that from minute one, he goes full in, this is a supernatural film, which I really, really appreciated. He just goes full head on. He's showing things that are very supernatural, very, that have to do with the powers that are explained in The Shining. And then it goes even deeper into Danny's abilities. And that's what I loved about this film. And, I'm not going to say any more than this, but I want to say that Acts 1 and 2 have nothing to do with the Overlook Hotel. And I love that, because by the time you get to Act 3, you're like, wow, when are they going to get to the hotel? When is this going to be the sequel to The Shining? Because it feels like its own film up to that point with some of the previous characters of The Shining. In Act 3, he goes full on, and I think the third act of Dr. Sleep even surpasses the third act of The Shining, in my opinion. Even though Acts 1 and 2, I do think, are weaker than Acts 1 and 2 of The Shining.
Yeah, and I would argue that Act 3 was, to me, the weakest part. It may have been the scariest part of The Shining, but I feel like they were the weakest part of The Shining.
Right.
I mean, yes, everyone wants to see that money shot of Jack Nicholson, hacking with the axe, but I thought the exposition in scenes in Acts 1 and 2 were much, I found them much more intriguing. Maybe that's just because I'm not, a huge horror guy. So I was enjoying the exposition and getting into the film before the actual scary part, so to speak.
Absolutely. And that's what's the best part of this film. He lets you get into it. And that's another strength of Dr. Sleep. So, maybe next Halloween, or if you have the feeling that you want to watch Dr. Sleep sooner than that, Ryan, maybe we'll drop a review of that one to let you know what you think about that. But is there anything else you want to say on The Shining? I gave it a 10 out of 10. Ryan, what was your score?
8.5 out of 10.
All right. Awesome. Any other comments to leave us with here?
No, I mean, I think this is a must-watch horror film. Or not, this is not, your horror film today, like Dom said.
Right.
Jump scares. This is truly a great piece of cinema. So definitely give it a watch. If you're not fond of horror, maybe I watched it late one night. Probably should have watched it like 2 p.m. on a Sunday or something like that. I would have felt a lot more comfortable afterwards going to sleep. But a great film nonetheless. So definitely recommend from both of us.
All right, so that's it for our review of The Shining, one of my favorite films of all time. Stay tuned for our next review, Halloween week this week. Of course, Halloween tradition, we got to review Halloween, John Carpenter's first, of course we'll talk about it in that, but a seminal horror film, created a slasher genre of its own, but we'll go in depth on that in the next episode of Top of the List. Stay tuned for our review of Halloween, coming at you soon, and then I do want to drop my review of The Haunting of Bly Manor. Ryan, you're not going to watch that one. You're not a big fan of those Netflix shows, but I definitely watched it. I thought it was fantastic, so I'm going to give you guys my full thoughts on that. Probably a 15-minute video coming your guys' way. But other than that, you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Dom Gonzalez48. And then RB, where can they find you?
Yeah, find me on Instagram at RB_the_SID and on Twitter at RB with the call.
All right, awesome, man. If you're watching this on YouTube, give it a like, leave a comment down below of what else you'd like to see, or just what were your thoughts on The Shining? Did you like it? Did you dislike it? And of course, subscribe for more videos. We drop at least one video a week, sometimes 2, sometimes 3. We just drop whatever we feel like. We like hanging out and talking movies. Yes, so, oh, and we're also on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Leave us a 5-star review, and Google Podcasts as well. Always taking suggestions, and stay tuned for the next episode. We'll catch you for our Halloween review. See you guys later.
Have a great week.